The Last Pharaoh's Fall, Egypt's Final War of Independence, 30 BCE. The war that led to the fall of the last native Egyptian pharaoh was a civil war. It was fought between two of Cleopatra's brothers and sisters. In fact, it was the first ever war where brother fought against sister, uncle against niece, aunt against nephew. It was also the very last war in which Rome wasn't involved. To understand it, let's go back to the beginnings. After the death of their father, Ptolemy XII, Cleopatra became the ruler of Egypt at only 21 years old. She was proclaimed both king and pharaoh. However, the title of king didn't apply only to her, but also to her younger sister, Arsinoe, who was just 7 years old when their father died. This means that technically she was queen regnant, but in reality, she ruled over no one. Just like her father before her, Cleopatra had to balance the interests of Rome and those of Egypt, which sometimes clashed with each other. She was never really accepted by the Romans. They despised her for her cunning ways, and most of all, they despised her for her looks. According to them, she was ugly, short, or had a strange disease that made her look weird. And even though that might be true, we will probably never know, but the Egyptians loved Cleopatra. They saw her as a living goddess. She came to power at a time when Egypt was facing harsh economic challenges, including food shortages. She solved these issues and made sure everyone knew how much she did for them. So they erected statues and built temples in her honor. Unfortunately, this didn't sit well with her younger sister, Arsinoe, who wanted some of that action too. The conflict between the sisters began while their father was still alive. Both women were interested in marrying Roman general Pompey, who eventually chose Cleopatra. After he did so, Ptolemy banished Arsinoe from court. When he died, his will declared that Cleopatra would become the sole ruler of Egypt. Arsinoe fled to her maternal grandparents in Rome. There, her maternal uncle, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, helped her take control of the eastern part of the kingdom. Meanwhile, Cleopatra controlled the western part and kept the title of queen. For 6 years, both sisters ruled their respective parts of the kingdom, each claiming to be the rightful ruler of all of Egypt. However, neither of them could keep their part of the kingdom without the help of Rome. This led to a number of diplomatic missions to the capital city of Alexandria, where peace negotiations failed. Soon enough, Arsinoe, who was supported by Rome, raised an army and marched west. She easily defeated Cleopatra's forces and took control of the capital. Cleopatra fled to the east, hoping to raise another army and come back to claim what was rightfully hers. Unfortunately for her, her attempts to gain support were unsuccessful. The people hated her for leaving the country and letting Arsinoe take control. While she was gone, famine struck again and people blamed Cleopatra for it. By the time she managed to raise an army, Cleopatra was just too late. No one wanted to fight for her anymore. She fled to the port city of Actium, where her last hope awaited. Cleopatra's lover, Mark Antony, was a Roman general and triumvir who controlled the eastern part of the empire. Together, they planned to flee to India, where they would rule as pharaoh and king consort. However, on their way there, they ran into a storm that destroyed their fleet. They barely managed to escape, but once they did, Cleopatra and Antony went their separate ways. Mark Antony died in August of 32 BC after getting stabbed in the back by Octavian, later known as Emperor Augustus, who was the adopted son and heir of Julius Caesar. Soon enough, Octavian sent troops to finish what he started. He invaded Egypt and forced Cleopatra to commit suicide. Her head was cut off, placed on a spear and displayed throughout the cities of Egypt, including her hometown of Alexandria. Her lover, Mark Antony, met a similar fate. His head was cut off and displayed next to hers. However, the final blow to Egypt was delivered by Octavian, who annexed it to Rome. Egypt had been independent for over 3,000 years, yet it took Rome less than 40 to make it a province of the empire. Yet, as we said, the war that led to its demise wasn't solely caused by Rome. In fact, it was caused by Cleopatra's own family. Once more, let's get back to the beginning of the war. Arsinoe was proclaimed queen of the eastern part of Egypt when she was just 7 years old. Her mother, Cleopatra, had fled to Rome, where she spent most of her childhood. Most likely, her maternal grandparents raised her in Rome, too. And that's why she thought she had a right to rule over all of Egypt. On the other hand, Cleopatra thought she was the rightful ruler, because she was the eldest daughter. According to Egyptian customs, Arsinoe's age didn't matter. It was customary for young girls to marry at 14, and for them to have children as soon as they were able. This meant that even if Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Arsinoe would still be the rightful ruler. Cleopatra knew this and desperately wanted to change the rules in her favor. That's why she asked her father to proclaim Cleopatra and Ptolemy, her 13-year-old son, Corrigens, but he refused. As we said, after their father's death, Cleopatra and Arsinoe ruled their respective parts of Egypt, although they were just 21 and 7 respectively. They both enjoyed all the benefits of being pharaoh. They lived in palaces, wore the finest clothes and jewelry, and they also had their own armies. Their means of sustenance were different, though. Cleopatra ruled as an absolute monarch. She took taxes from her subjects, but she also provided them with protection and services. Arsinoe, on the other hand, was essentially a puppet ruler. Rome was in control of everything, including collecting taxes. She wasn't allowed to do anything without the Senate's permission. As you can imagine, this infuriated her, and she wanted more independence. Unfortunately, Rome had too much control over her and her siblings' lives, and they weren't about to change that anytime soon. This is why Arsinoe decided to take matters into her own hands. At the age of 17, she traveled to Alexandria to negotiate peace with her older sister. We don't know exactly why, but she invited Cleopatra to her palace under false pretenses. Most likely, she wanted to imprison her sister there. When Cleopatra arrived, Arsinoe had her arrested and locked up in the Tower of the Winds. The reason for this move is unknown, but it was probably related to Cleopatra's refusal to give up the throne. Regardless, Cleopatra managed to escape and flee to her part of Egypt. From there, she wrote a letter to Rome asking for help against her evil sister, Arsinoe. Naturally, Rome sided with the popular Cleopatra, and this led to Arsinoe declaring war on her. Arsinoe had a large army at her disposal, but Cleopatra wasn't alone. She had the support of Rome, which sent a fleet to assist her. This force consisted of 2,000 cavalrymen, 40 elephants, and 6,000 infantrymen. Even though Cleopatra's army was outnumbered, her soldiers were better trained and equipped, and this is why they won every single battle. One of these battles ended with Cleopatra's forces burning down the Temple of Artemis, one of the ancient world's 7 wonders. Even though Cleopatra won every battle, she couldn't defeat Arsinoe, who kept running away instead of confronting her head-on. It seemed like the war would go on forever. At this point, Cleopatra had a choice to make. She could keep chasing her sister, or she could wait for her to make a mistake and then pounce. She chose the second option. In the meantime, Cleopatra secured her borders, collected more resources, and waited for Arsinoe to attack. When her sister finally did, Cleopatra was ready. She led her forces to meet Arsinoe's army near the city of Gaza. There, she defeated her sister once and for all and captured her. We don't know what happened to Arsinoe after that. Some sources say that Cleopatra blinded and imprisoned her, while others say that she executed her. Regardless, It was the end of Arsinoe the Great. After her defeat, Cleopatra had full control over Egypt, but she wasted no time. She didn't rebuild what her sister had destroyed or help those who suffered during the war. Instead, she went to Alexandria and threw a victory party. It lasted for 180 days, and during that time, Cleopatra spent more than 10 million silver coins. Needless to say, this angered the Egyptians, who revolted and killed her. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn something new, stay tuned.